Hello friends, this is Team Super Simplified and today we are here with Economic Survey 2017 Chapter 3. So let's get started. The title of the Chapter 3 is Demonetization, to DFI or demonize. So in this chapter we will discuss the recent exercise of demonetization and we will try to understand the intentions behind demonetization and its expected positive and negative impacts on the various sectors of economy. Okay, so let's start. On November 8, 2016, the government announced a historic measure with profound implication for the economy. The two largest denomination notes, that is rupees 500 and rupees 1000, were demonetized with immediate effect. Now, point to be noted that around 86% of the cash in circulation was in the form of rupees 500 and 1000. Okay, so suddenly 86% of the cash was out of circulation and restrictions were also put on the withdrawal from the bank accounts, right? But demonetization is not a new concept as such. Many other countries have undertaken this exercise world over, but India's demonetization is unique in two aspects. So what are those? The first point is the secrecy and suddenness of this particular activity, and the other thing is that it has happened during the normal economic and political conditions. All other sudden demonetizations around the world have occurred in the context of hyperinflation or war or political upheavals or other extreme circumstances, right? But ours was during a normal economic and political conditions. So these are the two unique points about India's demonetization, right? Secrecy and suddenness, and during the normal economic and political conditions, right? So let's come to the aim of demonetization. What were we trying to achieve with this particular exercise? So the aim here was fourfold. There were four main aims. First, to curb corruption. That was a main aim. To control counterfeit currency, and to curb the use of high denomination notes for terrorist activities, and to counter the accumulation of black money. And this was not an isolated attempt to curb black money. Government has already taken some steps in this direction. Let's have a look on them. These are some of the recent initiatives to curb black money. A special investigation team was created in Union Budget 2014. Then Black Money and Imposition of Tax Act, which is popularly known as Black Money Bill, was enacted in 2015. Then Benami Transactions Act 2016 is also a legislation in this direction. And Information Exchange Agreement was signed with Switzerland to get information on the black money holders. Double Taxation Avoidance Agreement with Mauritius, Cyprus and Singapore was amended to tackle tax evasion. And Income Disclosure Scheme known as Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana was introduced by the government to give a chance to the black money holders so that they can declare their money, pay the taxes and regularize the remaining amount, right? So these were some of the steps taken in the past in order to tackle black money. Now the thing is, even for India, demonetization is not new. Demonetization has taken place in India earlier also, in two instances, 1946 before independence and 1978, right? But these two previous instances of demonetization in 1946 and 1978 did not have any significant effect on the cash. But the recent demonetization exercise had a huge impact on the cash supply, though temporary, but comparatively a bigger impact. And that is because 86% of the cash was in the form of 500 and 1000 rupee notes. And these were suddenly out of circulation, right? And as we know, India is a very cash dependent economy. That is why we faced more problems. So what is the relationship of India and cash, right? Let's understand. So India's intimate relationship with cash can be understood by seeing the high cash to GDP ratio, right? India's currency to GDP ratio has evolved in two broad phases. It declined for first 15 years after independence, and then again we saw an upward trend which started in 1970 and it accelerated further during the growth boom of 2000s. So it is still increasing, right? So we can say we are a cash dependent economy, and this is a fact which proves it. 98% of the transactions by volume use cash in India. So let's have a look at some of the supporting statistics here. Here you can see the consumer transaction carried out in cash as a percentage. These are 2015 figures. On the y-axis you have the percentage of transactions carried out in cash, and on the x-axis you have the countries. And here is India, right? So if you see in India's case, 68% of the transactions by value and 98% of the transactions by volume are carried out using cash, right? So we are a highly cash dependent economy. That thing is very clear, and that is why it pained a lot when demonetization took place, right? And even our cash to GDP ratio indicates the same thing. Now this graph shows the cash to GDP ratio against countries per capita GDP. On the y-axis we have cash to GDP ratio, and on the x-axis we have per capita national income. And here you can see three segments. These are low income countries, these are middle income countries, and these are advanced economies, that is high income countries, and these dots represents the countries. And here we have India, and this line is the regression line, that is the equilibrium line. India lies above the regression line, right? So it is showing an abnormal behavior. The cash to GDP ratio is more than expected, and when we move from left to right here, that is from low income countries to high income countries, we can see the cash to GDP ratio is actually falling. So what you observe here is, on an average, the use of cash declines with the development, but India's level is somewhat higher than other countries in its income group, right? If you see the central plane, most of the countries are below the line, but India is above the line, right? So India is an outlier. So is there any problem? Yeah, there is a problem. So economic survey says that this extra cash seem to suggest that some of the cash holdings were not being used for legitimate transactions, but perhaps for other activities such as corruption, right? And this presumption is quite logical, because across the globe there is a link between the cash and the illicit activities. The higher the amount of cash in the economy, the greater is the amount of corruption. Now this is the relationship between the cash to GDP ratio and corruption. So on the y-axis we have the cash to GDP ratio again, and on the x-axis we have the corruption index. So as cash to GDP ratio is increasing, the corruption index is also increasing. So there is an intimate relationship between cash and corruption, right? Now we are going to the most important part of this chapter, so please pay attention. So here we will study the impacts of demonetization. So here economic survey has given its forecast of impact on various sectors of the economy, and these are in two categories: the short term effect till end December and the long term effect. So let's go through one by one. So what is the impact on money or the interest rate? So in the short term, cash declined sharply, and in the long term, cash will recover, but it will settle at a lower level, because people will get used to digital platforms and all those things, so less cash will be required in the economy. And in the short term, bank deposits increased sharply because all the old currency was deposited in the bank. And in the long term, deposits will decline, yes, because people will draw this money again, but probably it will settle at a slightly higher level, because a lot of unaccounted money has come into the banking system. And RBI's balance sheet largely unchanged in the short term, because return of the currency reduced the central bank's cash liabilities but increased its deposit liabilities to commercial banks. But in the long run, if we see, RBI's balance sheet will shrink because there will be a lot of unreturned currency, right? And interest rates on deposits, loans and government securities have declined, right? So loan rates could further fall because the deposits with the banks have increased, right? And what about the financial system savings? So this has increased because people have a lot of unaccounted money has come into the banking system, so all the savings have become formalized, and it is going to further increase to the extent that cash to GDP ratio will fall permanently, right? It will come towards the equilibrium. And what about corruption? So in the short term it has not said anything, but in the long term it will decline. Now what about unaccounted income or the black money? In the short term, stock of black money has fallen as some of the holders have come into the tax net. And in the long run, the formalization of the economy should reduce the flow of unaccounted income, because most of the transactions are going to come in the formal system of the economy. What about the private wealth? Private sector wealth has declined in the short term, since some of the high denomination notes were not returned and the real estate prices have fallen. And in the long run, wealth could further fall if the real estate prices continue to decline. What about public sector wealth? There's no effect on it. In the long run, government or RBI's wealth will increase because there will be a lot of unreturned cash. That is what economic survey expects. And what is the impact on formalization or the digitalization of the economy? It says that in the short term, digital transactions have increased sharply using RuPay or Aadhaar enabled payment system, and existing users transactions also increased in line with the historical trend. And in the long run, some people will return to cash as the supply normalizes, but some of the people will stick to the digital systems. So digitalization and formalization is getting a big boost after demonetization. And what about real estate? In the short term, prices have declined, and in the long run, prices could fall further as investing undeclared income in the real estate becomes more difficult. And what is the impact on the broader economy? It says that in the short term, it was observed that there were job losses, decline in the farm income, social disruption, and this all happened especially in cash intensive sectors. But in the long run, this should gradually stabilize as the economy is remonetized. Now let's understand the impact on GDP. So economic survey says that in the short term, the growth has slowed, but in the long run, if you see, it could be beneficial, right? Because the formalization of the economy will broaden the tax net, it will curb corruption, and it will have all other benefits. Now what about tax collection? It says income taxes have increased because of increased disclosure, and the payment to local bodies and the power distribution companies has increased because demonetized notes were used for this payment purpose. And in the long run, indirect and corporate taxes will decline because the growth has slowed down. But over the long run, if you see, then taxes should increase because the formalization will take place and it will expand the compliance and the tax net. Now, what about the uncertainty or the credibility element in the economy? So uncertainty has increased because of this government policy, because the firms and the households are not sure what will be the economic impact and what are the implications and what are the future policy decisions, right? So people will postpone their investment decisions and purchase of the durable goods. But in the long run, if we see, then credibility will be strengthened, and that will happen when demonetization is accompanied by complementary steps. So government should try hard for full remonetization, and tax arbitrariness and harassment should be avoided. So these were the impacts on various sectors of the economy as assessed by the economic survey, right? So let's move ahead. Now let's have a look at some of the benefits of demonetization. The first thing is tax on the black money. So government was able to tax the black money because if you declare the black money, then you have to pay tax under Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Yojana. If you continue to hide, then you cannot use it. So it is like 100% tax because government's liability comes down by that extent. And if you launder the black money, then you have to pay a cost of conversion to the people who are standing in queue in the banks and depositing your money in their account, right? And second benefit is that the tax compliance will increase because there will be a fear of financial penalty. And there is also fear of social condemnation because the support shown by the general public towards demonetization is tremendous. So it is very clear that people are not going to tolerate the black money and black money holders. And digitization is getting a boost here, and that will help in tax administration, right? And because of this, tax to GDP ratio will improve. And another benefit is tax on informal savings. So a lot of savings were happening outside the banking system, outside the formal economy. So this exercise has helped in channeling those savings into the formal financial system. Okay. And because of this, the interest rates will be lowered because the quantum of deposit with the banks is increasing day by day, right? And this will help in reduction of the cash to GDP ratio, which will have a positive impact on the growth in the long run. Now we are talking a lot of things about the digital economy. We are talking about the formalization of the economy. But the question is our entire population enabled to use the digital platforms? Now, in order to understand this, we have to understand the population profile of our country. So 350 million people in India have regular phones, the feature phones, and 250 million people have smartphones, and 350 million people are without cell phone, right? So when we talk about the digital economy, that people will perform digital transactions, so how the government caters to the need of these three categories? So let's understand. So government has launched the BHIM app, Bharat Interface for Money, which is a mobile app basically, and it works on the platform of UPI, Unified Payment Interface of National Payment Corporation of India. So this is a mobile app basically. So this is designed for the people who are holding smartphones. So this category 250 million people are taken care of, right? They can perform their digital transactions using this particular app. Now, what about the people who are using regular phones, the feature phones which does not support apps? So for them, BHIM USSD 2.0 is launched for these feature phone users. So they can use this kind of USSD codes to perform digital transactions. And what about the people who don't possess a phone, who don't have a phone? So for them, if they have the Aadhaar card, then there is a mechanism known as Aadhaar Merchant Pay. And this is for those digital have-nots who do not have a cell phone, right? So all the three categories are actually taken care of in this move towards the digital economy. So we can see an element of inclusion here, and there is also a reduction in the online transaction fee to promote digital economy. So here we have digital transactions of digitally excluded who are using Aadhaar enabled payment system, the people who do not possess a smartphone. So if we see here, after November 2016, there's a sudden growth in the number of transactions. Right now, let's come to the less affluent people who have a phone but they don't have a smartphone, they have a feature phone. So even for them, if we see RuPay point of sale transactions and RuPay e-commerce transactions, we can see a spike after demonetization. This red line represents the event of demonetization. So after that, we can see a spike. And what about the affluent class? Yes, affluent class which uses credit card, debit card, they have smartphone. These people, and probably many of you, fall under this category. And even for them, we can see that there's a sudden increase in the number of digital transactions post demonetization. Then it says that demonetization came as a shock for the economy. So this shock was felt in three different areas. The first one was the aggregate demand shock, because it has reduced the supply of the money, which affects private wealth. And the second front was aggregate supply shock, because cash is necessary input for the economic activity. So the factories, manufacturing units, the various organizations will not be able to function at optimum level without cash, right? It is one of the inputs in the business. So business activity has come down. And third one was the uncertainty shock and the further policy responses, because we have also seen in the past that RBI policies were changing day in and day out, and so a lot of reactive decisions were taken by RBI at that time. So there was a lot of uncertainty in the market. So these were the three shocks received by the economy because of demonetization. So definitely there is an impact, right? So how to gauge that impact, how to identify objectively? So economic survey says that if you study these 5 broad indicators and you know what is the trend in these 5 directions, then you can assess objectively what is the overall impact on the GDP. So we should first see what is the impact on the agricultural sowing, and that was a Rabi season. So we have to see what is the agricultural Rabi season sowing, and what is the impact on indirect tax revenue, on the automobile sales, on the real estate prices, and on the real credit growth. So now we will see one by one what is the impact on these, positive or negative. So let's come to the first point, Rabi sowing for wheat and gram. So this graph shows that aggregate sowing for the 2 major Rabi crops, that is wheat, pulses, gram. It exceeded last year's plantation by 7% and 15% respectively. Whether this will lead to a proportionate increase in the production will depend on some of other factors also. For example, to the extent farmers will have access to inputs, for example seeds and fertilizer, credit, labor, etc. And these things got impacted by demonetization. So what is the impact we have to see in this particular direction? Now second point is the growth in indirect taxes. So we can see that since the economic activity has come down, so the collection of indirect taxes has actually come down after demonetization, which is quite natural. Then growth in the automobile sales, we can very clearly see that there is a sharp decline because there was a cash crunch. So obviously the number of transactions will fall. And what about the real estate prices? So this real estate bubble was kind of burst at that time temporarily, and we can see that there is again a decline in the real estate prices, which was one of the expectations from demonetization. What about the real credit growth? Credit growth in the economy was already weak thanks to the twin balance sheet problem, but the growth pattern is further weakened after demonetization. So there is a negative impact on the real credit growth, right? So these were the 5 indicators. And what can we say about the GDP? We can say that in the short term there is a negative impact on the GDP, but in the long run it is going to boost the performance of Indian economy, right? Let's move ahead. Now economic survey sees this entire thing in one more angle. It says it is a kind of redistribution activity, and some redistribution has come to the government. It says that demonetization will redistribute resources. How? Because the black money holders will provide money to the people who are standing in the queue, and this could have a positive wealth effect because the cash would go from the people with a low propensity to spend to those with a greater propensity to spend, and there will be a wealth gain by the government also from the unreturned cash, but we have seen that this is not much. And income taxes could go up as the black money is being deposited in the bank accounts, and thus it is getting accounted, right? So this is how the redistribution of resources is going to happen in the economy. But there are some negative impacts also. For example, the cost of printing and circulating the new notes, it is a burden on the economy, and the GDP growth has definitely declined in the short term, right? So the corporate and indirect taxes tax collection has declined. So this is a negative impact. Okay, so what are the markers of success which we can expect in the coming future? So first thing is the digitalization. So it has already started picking pace, but we will see a further advancement in this particular direction. And cash to GDP ratio has declined already, which is a desirable trend. Tax collection will get a boost because the tax bracket is going to increase because of the formalization of the economy, and real estate prices have already declined, and we will see a further decline. And these are the supporting statistics. We can see after 2016 second quarter there's a sudden decrease in the real estate prices. Okay, so economic survey says that yes, there are some short-term costs which we have to pay, but there are long-term benefits. So what we should try is we should maximize the long-term benefits and we should minimize the short-term costs. So what should the government do in this particular direction? So it has given some points. So it says that fast remonetization, so replenish the cash shortage as soon as possible, and government has tried that its level best to this particular thing. And internal convertibility should be ensured, because unless people have confidence that money deposited in bank accounts is freely convertible into cash and vice versa, they will be reluctant to deposit their cash in the first place, right? And instead they will start hoarding it, which will starve the formal financial system of the resources and the informal economy of the currency it needs for the transactions, right? So that should not happen. So internal convertibility should be ensured. And what about the windfall? It says that there will be a windfall gain from the unreturned notes, right? And this gain should be deployed towards a capital type expenditure, should be used very judiciously. And it also emphasizes that the boost received by digitalization because of demonetization should continue in near future also. But it also gives a caution here. It says that digitalization is not a panacea, it is not a solution for all the problems, nor the cash is all bad, right? So it says that public policy must balance benefits and costs of both forms of payments, right? And the most important thing in the aspect of digitalization, the cyber security system should be strengthened to increase the trust in digital payments, right? And another important point, the interoperability of the payment systems should be ensured. So for that, unified payment interface has been launched by National Payment Corporation of India, right? Now let's quickly recap everything. So demonetization in India was introduced on 8th November 2016, where 86% of the cash, which was in the form of 500 and 1000 rupee notes, suddenly went out of circulation. So the public and economy was deprived of cash. But what were the aims of demonetization? To curb corruption, to curb counterfeiting, to curb the use of high denomination notes for terrorist activities, and to counter the accumulation of black money. Then we saw the impact of demonetization sector wise. You should revise that particular slide, it is very important. Okay, then we saw India's love for cash, because of which the cash to GDP ratio is very high, and 98% of the transactions by volume are happening in cash. And we also saw what are the steps taken by the government to give a boost to digitalization of the economy and for the full spectrum of the population, for all the user groups, for smartphone users, for feature phone users, and for the people who don't even have a smartphone. For them, Aadhaar enabled payment system is available, right? So these are all the steps taken to promote digital transactions. Then high cash to GDP ratio means higher level of corruption. That also we have seen a correlation given by Transparency International. And finally, Economic Survey has given some points that how to maximize benefits and minimize the cost. It says that there should be fast demonetization, and there should be a continuous boost to digitalization, and interoperability of the transaction platforms should be ensured. And the most important thing is cyber security should be ensured in order to build confidence towards the digital economy, right? So that's all guys, that's all from our side. So if you liked this lecture, please click on like, please share your comments, and please subscribe to the channel for regular notifications. And you can download these slides from our Facebook page. The link is provided in the description section below, and we will meet you soon with the chapter 4. Till then, take care, bye bye.